The lesson up. All right, so we are in Revelation chapter 17. If you remember last week, we kind of did an intro to Revelation 17 by going to verse 5 and looking at the name of this harlot and got the details on that. So we're going to go back now to verse 1 and kind of walk through the verses and try to get through about verse 8 today. We'll see how much we can get done in the time we have. I may skip over some of the verses so that we can get through it. But remember again here in 17 and 18, we've kind of gone backwards a little bit. We got to chapter 16, which was kind of the end of the tribulation. And now, as John has done on several occasions, we go backwards and pick up some details of the story. Here, the details about Babylon in chapter 17 and 18. Chapter 17 really focused on the false religion that is involved during this time. And then chapter 18, the false economic and political system. We'll see both of them discussed at that time. So remember again that we've said that when we talk here about the mystery, this is the mystery Babylon, because we're not talking about a real city of Babylon. We're talking about this world system, religious and political system that's called Babylon. But we also went back and looked at the kind of the heritage of Babylon coming from the Tower of Babel, really that all false religions find their heritage in Babylon, and also at the end times will kind of reconvene, if you will, into Babylon as they go into the Battle of Armageddon, etc. One of the commentaries made this statement I thought was interesting. It said, in our seemingly irreligious world that we have right now, it's not that it's becoming less religious, it's simply becoming less Christian. The world is actually becoming much more religious. It's just the religion that they're following is not the Christian religion. So it's just something to think about when we talk about the one world religion here in chapter 17. We're certainly not talking about a Christian religion. We're talking about following after a very different system led by the beast. So don't get that confused in your head. And you certainly have the, as we talked about before, you've got the deception of the demons who are now covered the earth at this point in history, deceiving people to fall in line with this one world religion that is in place at this time. All right, so let's go to verse 1. It says, "Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters.'" So here you have one of the seven angels that we saw back in chapter 16. It's very likely the seventh angel, because if you remember, the seventh angel had the recognition that Babylon needed to be judged for what it has done. And so now we're going to be talking about the judgment of Babylon, but it's not very clear. It's one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls. They come and give this message to John here in verse 1. I did want to just kind of stop up front, right, and recognize, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came talk to me saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot." And we're going to be talking about the great harlot here, over and over again. And I just want you to consider, as we think about harlotry today, as we think about prostitutes today, we should have the same kind of reaction to this religion, this false religion that we have towards someone who may prostitute themselves in this lifetime. So don't just skip over this word harlot. It should be a smack in the face kind of word that's used here by John to describe this religion. It's harlotry, it's prostitution that we have here from this religion that's in front of us. Now notice that it says, "who sits on many waters." We've talked about before when we talked about Jesus sitting on the throne. The sitting is an important word in Scripture. It means some sense of authority, some sense of power, sovereignty, if you will. When it's used in Scripture, it's typically the posture of kings and deity. when it says that they sit. So here by this harlot sitting, it's showing some level of authority that this false religion has. The harlot is the picture of this false religion. So you've got this authority that this false religion has. And notice that it says on many waters. If you actually skip over to verse 15 for a minute in chapter 17, we actually have in the second half of this chapter a explanation of what we have in the first half. So in chapter 15, it says, "Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." So essentially, the picture here is this harlot sitting on the waters means that she has authority over the whole earth, right? Over all these kingdoms, over all these people, over all these nations. This one world religion, that is the picture of it by her sitting on the many waters. Of course, when you think about any kind of great cities are often connected to water in some ways, so that picture should not be a surprise either. Right, let's go down to verse 2. It says, "With whom the kings of the earth committed," excuse me, "with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So here again you have this this authority of the harlot connected to all of the kings of the earth, right? They are all allied with the with this harlot, with this great religion. They're all together. It's connected to the kings and the sovereignness of their nations are all together with the harlot in bringing this thing into pass. One thing that's just kind of interesting here is notice that it says that they committed fornication and not adultery. Any idea why they would use the word fornication and not adultery?
Rich, my translation does have adultery.
Well, that's just wrong, Walt.
Okay.
It should be fornication.
Mine says acts of immorality.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me tell you what I'm going to say then, because obviously the translations have not helped my case here. The word is actually fornication here and not adultery. And the reason is adultery happens within marriage. Fornication happens outside of marriage. So when it says here the kings committed fornication, they don't have a relationship with God, and they are going after other gods. They're going after other religions, right? So when it talks about Israel, Israel commits adultery because Israel had a relationship with God and then they went after foreign idols. But these kings do not have a relationship with God. They're going after foreign idols, so they're committing fornication. Just a little technical thing in the middle of this I thought I would share, which obviously got confused, so we'll just leave it at that. So, but that just a little point there. So again, this is idolatry by the pagans, so this is fornication. I will show you, go back to Hosea, if you will. If you go to Daniel and turn right, you can find Hosea. Hosea chapter 4. So here again, when it talks about Israel, again, it's talking about harlotry in verse 11, chapter 4, verse 11, Hosea. Mine says, "Harlotry, wine, and new wine enslave the heart. My people ask counsel from their wooden idols, and their staff informs them. For the spirit of harlotry has caused them to stray, and they have played the harlot against their God. They offer sacrifices on the mountaintops and burn incense on the hills under oaks, poplars, and terebinths, because their shade is good. Therefore your daughters commit harlotry, and your brides commit adultery." So again, you just see this picture is all throughout the Old Testament talking about Israel being a harlot. And here we're seeing the kings are now also being harlots and committing fornication with the great harlot, this false religion that is in place. And they are, and finally it says in the end of 2, right, they were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So they're drunk with the wine of the adultery that they have committed, with the fornication that they have committed, the prostitution that they have committed. They are doing it so much that they're drunk with the wine of it. And we'll see that picture a little bit clearer as we get further down in this scripture. Now, mine says, let's see, verse 2. Mine says, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. What does yours say there? Mine says the inhabitants of the earth. What does yours say?
Mine says those who dwell on the earth.
Yeah.
Mine says dwellers.
Yeah, so if you remember, we've seen this expression before, right? Those who dwell on the earth. That is a code word for unbelievers, right? Those who dwell on the earth. Every time that's used in Revelation, it's referring to those who are not following God. So here again, you see, first of all, that the kings in the first half of the verse are committing fornication. And then the second half, you see the inhabitants of the earth. And it's not just the kings who are committing fornication, but you also see the inhabitants of the earth, or those who are not saved, who are also being drunk with the wine of her fornication. They're being intoxicated with this new religion. They're drunk with this new religion that is in place. Those who dwell on the earth are following after this new religion. So that's the picture there, right? That this new religion, this harlot, is in place. This worldwide religion, and then all of the kings, all of the leadership is following after, and then all the inhabitants of the earth are doing the same. It is completely covering the earth, this new false religion. Okay, and then verse 3. So he carried me away, he the angel, he carried me away into the spirit, into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So this angel carries him away into the wilderness, and I saw a woman, and this woman is the same woman, it's the harlot, right? I see the harlot sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So who is the beast that this woman is sitting on? This is an easy one. Who's the beast?
Antichrist?
It's the Antichrist. It's the same beast that we've been talking about for several chapters here. The beast is the Antichrist, and now you have this false religion. We've talked about the false prophet before, right? The false religion led by the false prophet is now sitting on the beast. Now, what is the picture of the false prophet sitting on the Antichrist? What does that picture show you? This is the Q&A part of the discussion here.
That the world system is based on the Antichrist and his laws and religion.
Yeah, I think it's certainly at least that, right? It's supported by the Antichrist. The two are connected, right? Is the point. And the false religion is supported by the Antichrist, is driven by the Antichrist. At the same time, the false prophet, you could say, is leading the beast, right? I mean, he's riding the beast. The beast would not have nearly as much power were it not for the false religion, right? Getting people's religion connected to their political and economy. That's the most powerful position that Satan can put us in. And so he's definitely connecting the false religion and the false economic and political systems by saying here that the harlot is riding on the beast. So absolutely. Now we notice at the second half of it, right, that it's full of blasphemous names. The woman is on this beast, which is full of blasphemy, names of blasphemy. Now we've seen this before. Skip back just a couple of chapters to chapter 13, verse 1. When we talked about the beast first arrived in chapter 13, Verse 1, it says, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. So here you have a blasphemous name, and now in chapter 17 you see many blasphemy names, many full of names of blasphemy. Now, what are the blasphemous names that are on the beast? What are those names? Give me an example of a blasphemous name that is on the beast.
I don't know. Could it be anything that's claiming that they're God? I mean, because this is kind of like it's not the Holy Trinity. It's the opposite of the Holy Trinity. So it's showing anything that's they're trying to claim as being the Lord and God.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, sometimes we think of blasphemous names in a very different way, but right here, you're talking about this beast is being called God, right? That's the most blasphemous name that you could call the beast, is to call him God, Lord God Almighty. Right? Those are the kinds of names that are written on this beast that are complete blasphemy, because this is not God, this is the beast, right? So when we see these blasphemous names that are on there, they're the names of God that are being attributed to the beast. He is self-deifying himself, if you will, right? He's claiming to be God, and he's putting these names on him, and he's having other people call him the beast. And we see the same thing again. Just to remind you, if you want the reference in Daniel 11:36, when we were there, we talked about the kings speaking blasphemies. Again, the kings calling the beast God, right? And that is blasphemy. Him doing that. So here we have this picture of the beast and the false religion. Just to say that the alliances that the harlot has are comprehensive. It's all of the kings. It's all of the people of the earth. It's a world dominating religious system. That's the point of these first 3 verses, is just to give you that picture. Now look at verse 4. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup. So here we have this picture of this woman, this harlot, and the point is she's amazingly attractive, right? She's dressed in the finest garments. She's wearing the finest jewelry. She has, in fact, a golden cup in her hand, which is a symbol of authority, which is a symbol of wealth. That you would have a golden cup. The whole point here is, again, I don't want us to ever miss this, that this religion, this religious system is incredibly attractive. The people of the earth love it, right? It's not that they're afraid of it or don't want it. They want to participate in it. It's all connected to wealth, right? It's all connected to beauty. It's all connected to what success looks like in the world. You want to be a part of this religious system here, because it's the thing. It's cool. It's what everybody wants to be a part of. So don't miss that. And that's the picture here, right? The purple, that's the royal thing, and the scarlet and the gold and precious stones, etc. So it's just, again, this is something that people are really going to want to participate in during this time. The whole world is going to be religious. In following after this religion in the end times, all who dwell on the earth, again, all who are not following after Christ. But notice then in the last part of the verse, right, that this cup that she has in her hand, however, is full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. She has this gold cup. It looks great. She looks great, but she's filled with abominations and filthiness of her fornication. It's filled with everything evil and wrong and bad is behind all of this beauty and wealth and gold cup, as we'll see as it's poured out. Verse 5 then is the name that we talked about last week. On her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots and the Abominations of the Earth. I will say, in that day, prostitutes actually had their name on their forehead. They would wear some kind of a piece of jewelry with their name inscribed on it. and have that on their name. That was the way that they were recognized as prostitutes. So this goes right along that. On her forehead had this name that let people know that this Babylon was a harlot. And then in verse 6, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So here now you have this harlot, and we mentioned before that the inhabitants of the earth were drunk, and here we see that the woman herself is drunk. This religion is drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs. So just indicating that this is a religion that is going to be devastating anybody that disagrees with them, right? Anybody who disagrees with this religion is going to be cut down and killed because all the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus are going to be attacked and killed during this time, and that's where it takes us all the way back to chapter 6 with the martyrs underneath the altar, right? So that's all being done by the harlot here. And then the last statement is intriguing. Let me just get down to my notes. Yeah, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. What other words do you have there in your translations? Mine says I marveled. What do you have?
Wondered.
Wondered.
Ours says greatly astonished.
Greatly astonished. Yeah. So again, I want to take us back to the comment I made at the beginning. When John sees this, it freaks him out. I mean, he's just like, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe this harlot who is drunk with the blood of the saints, and the whole world is following after her. Right? The whole world loves her and wants to be a part of what she's doing. John is shocked by what he sees. So I think part of what hit me here is we have lost our shock at what is going on in the world, right? We have lost our, I can't believe that's happening. And John here is just shocked and blown away by what's going on in the world. I will say that a piece of news comes by and I go, no way, that can't be true, right? That they're doing that now, right? And I think that to a large degree, we're seeing so much of this, we're just getting used to it, and it doesn't become shocking anymore. It doesn't become surprising to us, and I think that's not a good thing. We ought to be shocked. We ought to wonder in amazement at evil and sin as it plays out in our world. And so that this is just a reminder of that. I think that John here, when he sees this, when he sees the evil in the world and he sees the whole world going after it, that it just blows him away and shocks him. So, okay, I'll just for you to think about. All right, then so let's go on to verse 7. Yeah, we're doing good. We'll finish up 7 and 8. It says, but the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which was the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And by the way, I've kind of skipped talking about the 7 heads and the 10 horns. We're going to get into that a lot more next week, so I'm just kind of putting that on the side right now. We have talked about it some before as we've gone and looked at these verses. But here he says, I'm going to tell you about this mystery. The mystery is really about the relationship between this harlot and the beast. That's the part that when he talks about the mystery, why, the mystery is why in the world is the world going after this false religion, and what is the relationship between the religion and the beast? And we've talked about that some already, but that's really that the explanation that he dives into as he goes on to the rest of the chapter. I will say that there are, just to be completely transparent with you folks, is that, let's see. Yeah, so in verse 7, right, it says, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Go over to verse 18 for a minute in chapter 17. And it says here that, and the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Right? So he really spends a lot of time talking about the beast and very little time talking about the woman here in the rest of the chapter. But in verse 18, he does say the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And we talked about last week that this great city, this city of Babylon, that is being talked about here in chapter 17, right? The woman is that great city, Babylon, and as we mentioned last time, when we talk about Babylon here, we're really more talking about the world system, the evil world system that's in place, both the religious and the political systems, right? Again, so what I was about to say is, to be fully transparent, there are people who believe that when we talk about the great city here in 18, that he's talking about Babylon, the city, the real city of Babylon. And then there are those who believe, no, we're not talking about the real city of Babylon. We're talking about Rome, right? As Rome is rebuilt as Babylon, if you will. And then there are those who think, no, that Babylon itself is going to be rebuilt. And of course, Saddam Hussein, if you remember, did rebuild Babylon during his reign before he was taken out. So that city has been rebuilt. But it all comes down to a question of some Old Testament scriptures. And let me just, again, give you the references. And back in Isaiah chapters 13 and 14, and in Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, in both of those places, it talks about the final destruction of Babylon. When Babylon kind of petered out historically, it really wasn't destroyed. It just kind of people left it, and it no longer became a great city. There were some battles there and such, but the destruction that is described in back in Isaiah 13:14 and Jeremiah 50:51 is much more complete. Essentially, Babylon is wiped off the face of the earth in that time. And so there is still this final destruction of Babylon to come, which hasn't happened yet. So here when we talk about Babylon, so I'm saying all that to say this. I still believe that when here in Revelation 17 and 18, when it's talking about Babylon, it's talking about this world system, this new world system that's put in place. But I just wanted to let you know, there are people who try to get it connected with particular cities and talk about the destruction of those cities. And you know that in prophecy, often both things are true at the same time, right? There is a real city to be destroyed, and there is a system to be destroyed. And so I think that, you know, that is probably what's going on here when we're talking about here. If you look back at verse 15 that we looked at a minute ago, when we talked about the harlot, right? The waters which you saw where the harlot sit are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So again, this harlot is not just sitting on one city. This harlot is sitting on all of the nations, on all of the people, on the whole system that supports what she's doing. So just wanted to talk about the harlot a little bit before we kind of spend a lot of time talking about the beast. All right, let's just look at verse 8, and we'll kind of wrap up there with what we got in verse 8, again, to get us ready for the rest of what we're going to see in chapter 17. So in verse 8, it says, the beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. So this is a very full verse. So let me just pull out a couple of things here. First of all, the beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out. And at the end of the verse, it says kind of the same thing. The beast that was and is not and yet is. Anybody remember what this refers to when we talked about the beast back in chapter 13?
Was it about the Antichrist's false resurrection?
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 If you remember, if you go back to chapter 13, you'll see it in verse 3 and verse 12 when it talks about the beast getting the deadly wound, the mortal wound, if you will, and then somehow he's alive again later on. So the thought process here is that the beast is the Antichrist, the false Christ, and so he also has a false resurrection in the same way that Christ has a resurrection. They don't think of any new ideas on this trio of the Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. They just kind of try to replicate what is being done by God and Christ and the Holy Spirit. So here you have the beast with this false resurrection. So that is what is being talked about here. So look again at verse 8. The beast which you saw that was and is not and will ascend. So the idea was that the beast was there, somehow it was killed, and then somehow it was resurrected. So there's some kind of false resurrection in order to persuade the people, right? So remember again this picture of this Antichrist. He comes into power deceitfully, without conquest. He takes over. He's the great savior of the world by solving the economic and political problems. Right? Everybody loves him. He comes in, and then somehow, in order to get everybody on board, he takes on this mortal wound, and he quote dies in some way, and then when he comes back. He is essentially infused with a demon in some way. And then if you look over at verse 16, chapter 17, verse 16, we looked at this verse before. It says, "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate, naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire." So we see in the first half of chapter 17, the beast and the harlot are working together. At some point, the beast gets tired of the harlot and decides to devour the harlot. In other words, start to devour this false religion that's been put in place, because he just wants everybody to worship him. He doesn't want this intermediary of the false prophet messing around. He just wants everybody to worship him. He eventually devours the harlot. And completely takes over at this point in time. So it's a very dramatic change that goes on here. So you got again this Antichrist who comes in deceitfully, everybody loves him. Then this death is fabricated, and somehow he's brought back to life, but now has demonic power all over him, and it kills the Antichrist in some way. And as you see in verse 16 again. We'll go back into that. Now, having said all that, then look again at verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition, right? He comes out of the bottomless pit. We saw that back in chapter 11, how he comes out of the bottomless pit. But he also goes to perdition, right? He also goes to hell. He is sent into the lake of fire, as we'll see later on when we get to the end of the book. So, he has this false resurrection, but his final end is that Christ is going to take care of him, and he'll be thrown into the lake of fire, as we'll see later. And then the rest of the verse, "And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not." So here again, you have those who dwell on the earth. So those are talking about those who are unsaved. That they marvel at this beast, right? He is amazing. He somehow has come back to life. He is somehow all powerful. He's somehow just an incredible person. He's come back to life. The whole world marvels at him. And then we have this amazing connection with this other statement, right? Whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So here you have, I'm going to use the word the elect, right? The elect who they are not marveling. Those whose names are written, those who are not elect, those are the ones who are marveling at the Antichrist as he has this false resurrection and takes over completely. They are so drunk with the fornication, as it talked to us earlier. They don't see anything else except this false religion, this beast at this point in time. He's the only thing they're going to follow after him, regardless, even though we know what his end is going to be. They are. Let me also say this: they are convinced that at this point in time, Christianity, following after Christ, or being saved, is a backward idea, is a stupid idea. Christianity is weak, it's shallow, it's negative, it's foolish, it's certainly not respectable, it's even evil to these people, right? I just, when I think about that, I just think that that's a lot of where the world is going now, right? And the way they think about Christianity, it's not thought of in the way that we think about it. It's thought of as something foolish and not respectable and even evil, right? That people would think those kinds of things, think that there could only be one way to go to heaven. I mean, those people are obviously evil. And so you have the whole world kind of going to this false religion and believing these things. All right, the other thing I just wanted to kind of finish up with, and then we'll close for today. So again, those who follow the beast are the non-elect. I just want to show you one other verse. For those of you, well, let me show you the verse, then I'll say what I want to say. Second Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9. I will say that most of you guys went with us through the study of Romans when we had some healthy debates on this whole predestination election question, such that either you agree with me or you're just quiet because you don't want to argue anymore on this subject. My other class did not go through Romans. And so whenever we bring up these kinds of subjects, we get into these debates that we had now 2 or 3 years ago about this subject. So I bring you to this verse just to tickle that debate again. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. It says, the coming of the lawless one, okay, so this is the Antichrist, right? The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. So it's essentially the same thing that we have seen right here in Revelation, the same kind of statement, that those are going to perish, that they've been deceived by this false religion. And then the reason it gives is because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And what we read in Revelation is because their names were not written in the book, right? So what's interesting about this verse here in Thessalonians is that this is the one that there's great debate about what is actually meant here. When it says they did not receive the love of the truth, that can be interpreted 2 ways. One is, well, they didn't get it, right? They didn't receive it. It wasn't given to them, right? Their names were not written in the book of life. They were not elect. So therefore, they will perish. The other way that it's interpreted is there was something that man had to do in order to receive the gift, right? In order to receive the love of the truth, men had to receive it. They had to grasp it. They had to take it. And so this whole question comes down to, what is man's role in their salvation, right? Does man have a role in their salvation at all? And in this verse, I'm not answering that question. I'm just saying that this verse is one of those that is interpreted in both ways, depending upon what you believe about the answer to that question. If you believe that man does not have a role, then you say, well, they did not get it. God did not give it to them. If you believe that man does have a role, your response here is that they did not take it. They did not grasp it. They did not receive the gift. So I just wanted to leave you with that. It's for you who are still pondering this. I think that's part of the pondering that's going on there. Because somehow both of these truths are true, and we don't like to have those kinds of complications in our head. As Christians, we like to have it very clear as a yes, no, And this is one of those questions, unfortunately, it's not a yes, no. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop before we get into the rest of chapter 17. We'll finish that up next week and probably actually get a little intro into 18 before we start that. Any questions or comments or thoughts before we close here? So what I feel like I've done is I've completely pummeled you into the ground on these questions, and so you don't even make any comments anymore, which is not a good place to be. So I apologize for that. I really am open to more healthy discussion, even though I will probably pummel you again as we do that. But anyway, any other comments or thoughts on this? I think, again, I guess the thing that I actually want to leave you with is not this whole debate issue, but this whole question about us marveling at evil, us being amazed by evil. I think that we've gotten a little bit too comfortable with evil, and with the things that are going on around us, it doesn't shock us anymore when some new law is passed or someone says something or somebody does something in a demonstration. So keep your amazement, keep your healthy shock. I think it's important for us to recognize that we do have the truth, and we ought to be shocked by falseness. All right, anything else or any other prayer requests before we close? Let's see if anybody snuck on here. It looks like it's Sengu. All right, anything else? All right, so social on the 18th, and then we've got packets of boxes on August the 7th. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so put those things on your calendar, and we'll get to see your faces, which will be fun. At least most of your faces. So, all right, y'all have a good week.
Right.
Oh, Hugh.
And stop them.
See, this is why Joe's here. All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and then Hugh, if you don't mind leading some prayer, I'd appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, no problem here. Let's pray.